filed our right to counsel ballot measure. Supervisor Sheehy and Breed introduced at the board a much more limited right to counsel. Most tenants, because of the limits of that law, most tenants actually would not be represented under that legislation unless it's changed. So there's some major loopholes, but more importantly, it hasn't really moved forward. And we had a very good meeting with Supervisor Sheehy a few weeks back in which he pledged his support for this ballot measure and agreed that that legislation would be used to help implement the ballot measure. So there are things that the ballot measure doesn't get into the weeds about, things like, you know, how can we notify more tenants of their rights, things like that, that are perfectly appropriate to be in legislation, and we hope to work closely with Supervisor Sheehy to do that. Supervisor Breed has not committed around supporting the ballot measure or what the scope of that legislation would be. So there are two authors, and so far they have a different take on the legislation.
Thank you.
Hey, so the legislation doesn't speak to this too specifically, but how do you envision this working if passed, right? Like, if the voters decide, like, yes, we want to go through with this, like, how would it all work out between different city departments? And as a resident facing eviction, who would they go to seek representation?
So under the, and everyone heard the question? Sorry, I should have to repeat how it would be implemented. So under the measure, the mayor's office on housing would be responsible for implementing the measure during that first year. What we anticipate and what the mayor's office has indicated is that they would do similar to what they're currently doing, where they basically put out RFPs, enter into contracts with nonprofits to provide those services. So our assumption is that's how it will happen. Part of the reason we left some time for implementation is if there are different ideas for a better way to implement it, we want to make sure we can do that. Also, the board can make changes in the future as long as it effectuates the purpose of achieving a right to counsel. So if in the future the board of supervisors decides it's actually better in a different city department, or it should be at the public defender's office, or it should be with nonprofits, they'd be free to have those discussions and change that in the future without going back to the ballot.
All right, any final questions?
How much do you anticipate this costing?
The controller's estimate just came out, and the estimate was $4.2 to $5.6 million a year. We think that's high for reasons that I'd be happy to talk with you about after, but still in the ballpark. And significantly, the controller also notes that there could be significant cost savings because of the reduction in evictions and homelessness. So every city where this has been studied, in Boston, in New York, also in California, we see significant cost savings, sometimes double the actual cost of the program from having a right to counsel.
All right.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And then we are moving on to Proposition D, which is one of the gross receipts tax measures. And we have Kate Hartley here, who is a proponent of the measure.
Good afternoon, Kate Hartley. Thank you so much for this opportunity. Housing for All will provide resources for critical housing gaps in our system. First of all, homelessness. It also would provide resources to protect extremely low-income seniors living on fixed incomes. It would protect some of our most vulnerable residents living in SROs that are now, as never before, at risk of conversion to market rate through speculative actions. And it would protect our middle-income workforce households. More specifically, these new revenues would, 45% of which would go to homelessness. That would come in the form of prevention, such as the rapid rehousing program, so that we could help at-risk households before they ever land on the street to stay housed. Secondly, we would be providing for those households who do become homeless an expanded navigation and shelter system so that people could live in more stable and safe conditions than what the street offers. We would also create permanent exits to homelessness through additional permanent supportive housing beds and we would have a focus on homeless youth who desperately need our help. In addition, the vulnerable residents living in SROs, we see market rate speculators buying these buildings and forcing people out, the eviction risk that our previous speaker just spoke about. Housing for All would provide funding for nonprofits to purchase, rehab, and make those SROs permanently affordable at rents the SRO residents could truly afford with rental subsidies. We don't have that now. For our extremely low-income seniors, if you're living on Social Security alone, you cannot even afford an affordable rent in a deed-restricted property. Rental subsidies for extremely low-income seniors would allow seniors to live in our affordable housing, and we also have middle-income housing that would be protected through rent-controlled purchases and new middle-income building. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions here from DCCC members or the public at large? Member Galata.
Yeah, so will any units of housing be built as a result of this measure?
Yes. With this measure, we are able to build new housing for middle-income households, and in addition, if we have subsidies for seniors, that can go into the financing for new affordable developments that will serve them.
How many units?
Well, this measure overall, we estimate between now and 2030 will assist approximately 28,000 households. Of the new units, we believe we can build by 2030, over 2,000 units. And for our seniors, we believe that we can support over 2,500 seniors in new housing.
Member Galata, Member De Jesus.
So, I'm not really. So it's appropriate to have childcare. So, if I remember, is this the one where you're going after the same gross receipt taxes that the childcare is funded after, and there's a poison pill in there to actually axe the childcare if this one gets more votes? And I find that mean-spirited, and I don't understand why we would pit homelessness and childcare against each other. So maybe you can address that.
This is the same source as the child care measure. As a working mom, myself, with 2 children, we recognize that child care and affordable housing are equally valuable and necessary. I cannot speak to the board politics on the poison pill. There is a sense that both measures would, going after the same source, would create an excess draw that would make both difficult to fund. What I would say is that, from my perspective, that both measures are worthy and that we think an endorsement of both would make sense and the voters can decide.
Chair Campos.
I'm going to ask the same question of the other measure. I mean, along the lines, why make voters, be in a position where they have to choose between housing and childcare? There is an argument to be said that maybe it's better for the party to support neither and send it back so that City Hall can work out something. What's your response to that?
Again, I would say that both measures are very worthy, that the voters can decide for this ballot round, and that there are additional resources that can be accessed in future elections, and that we hope that there is an endorsement for both because both are very worthy measures.
And we have time for one more question if there's a member of the public who has a question.
In your speech you said middle income. Can you give me a dollar figure what you think that is?
Sure. So the range is, there is an affordability gap in San Francisco in most neighborhoods up to about 150% of area median income. So middle income we count as incomes between 70% of area median income and 150. Most of the middle income money will go to fund housing that's affordable at about 80% of area median income.
God, I didn't hear a dollar amount.
Yeah.
I'm not done yet.
Okay,
For
go ahead.
a household of 3, 80% of area median income is $85,000 a year. So that's typically 2 working adults and a child. So 2 working adults earning about a little over $40,000 a year. These are construction workers, social workers, they're teachers' aides, they're engineers, they're finance staff. They are the sort of core of San Francisco's hardworking, middle-income workforce.
Thank you very much. And then next we are actually going to be bringing Supervisor Aaron Peskin back up to talk about Proposition A, which is a proposed bond measure on the ballot. And I apologize that we didn't bring him up earlier, but I'll give you a little bit of exercise.
Thank you, Francis. 18 years ago, I had the honor and pleasure of working with Supervisor Sophie Maxwell to close not 1, but later on 2 polluting fossil fuel plants in San Francisco. First, the one in the Bayview, then the one at Potrero, which was a huge fight. Last year, our colleague Keith Baraka authored a resolution urging the city's retirement system to divest from its $500 million of holdings in fossil fuel companies, which we are continuing to work on. And if they say they are going to make a good proposal in the month of April, I'll believe it when I see it. But if they don't get it together, we are all going to go to the ballot in November and force their hand. And we have this incredible resource called Hetch Hetchy that generates oodles of hydroelectric clean energy that we deliver to municipal buildings in San Francisco. And we can now actually deliver to more city properties. As we develop Pier 70, we can deliver clean power to Pier 70. As we develop Seawall Lot 337, Mission Rock, the Giants Ballpark, Parking Lot A, we can deliver clean power to those facilities. We can deliver clean power to Treasure Island. We can deliver clean power, excess power that right now we do not use in San Francisco if we can build some electrical infrastructure through the San Francisco PUC. That requires the PUC's ability to sell revenue bonds. Right now, the only way the PUC can sell a revenue bond is by going to the voters. 16 years ago, Supervisor Maxwell and myself followed Tom Amiano's lead, and we actually made this exact charter amendment on the ballot to allow the PUC to sell bonds for water system, revenue bonds for water system improvements without a vote of the people. These are not general obligation bonds. They do not raise your property taxes. It's time the PUC, subject to a supermajority vote on the board, had that power. It is endorsed by all 11 members of the Board of Supervisors, by former Mayor Ed Lee, by acting Mayor London Breed, by interim Mayor Mark Farrell, and I commend it to the DCCC.
Who's opposing this and why? So I mean, you just listed like 1 billion people in support of it. Just like, what is the other side?
So far there is no other side. I was very stand-up, and I went to Pacific Gas and Electric and explained this to them. I do not think that it is a frontal assault on Pacific Gas and Electric's interest in San Francisco because they serve the private, non-municipal rate base. Having said that, Pacific Gas and Electric is not excited about this measure because if we do not serve these kind of emerging areas that I'm telling you, they actually could serve them instead. So they can expand their service area within the city, but we have the right to serve it ourselves, and we would be serving it with totally clean power. So I don't think they're happy about it, but it hasn't risen to the level of them opposing it. And quite frankly, after San Bruno to the south and the fires to the north, I don't think that they're really in a position to spend $10 million defeating it.
Thank you very much. Next, I know we're jumping all over the alphabet. Sorry for that. It was kind of based on people's availability, and there's a lot of other things going on today. But next, I would like to bring up Prop G, which is a parcel tax to help support our school district, and we are having a proponent, so a supporter for the measure speak.
Hi, I'm Susan Solomon. I'm Executive Vice President of United Educators of San Francisco. All right, thank you. Ken Trey may be joining me in a moment. Prop G will raise, if passed, this initiative will raise $50 million a year for 20 years for the public schools of San Francisco. In that $50 million a year, about $37.5 million will go directly to teachers, paraeducators, and other support professionals in the schools. What that means for our members in the United Educators of San Francisco is equivalent to a 7% raise. There's an additional, that's 75% of the money, an additional 11% goes to other workers in the schools. So SEIU members, principals, not central office administrators, but everybody else who works in the district. And the difference between having that and not having that is the difference of whether we can hold on to educators in San Francisco. So we've all heard a lot about the affordability crisis and what it means for especially our newer members to stay in the city. But every year now for the last few years, the school district has lost about 500 educators, mostly teachers. And most of the reason that we see that loss is that people cannot stay in the city. So passage of this parcel tax will make a huge difference between holding on to educators and not holding on to them here.
Thank you. Any questions, Chair Campos?
Is there any opposition to this?
There is no opposition to this.
Wow.
None at all. And many, many supporters.
So, I mean, I support it too, but I also don't understand how we have a $9 billion budget and we can't pay our teachers a living wage to stay in this city. And now that we have the mayor's raise, the mayor's up for raise, I'm just wondering if we could put pressure on these candidates to put education on the teachers number one, you know, and put them first, and bring them up so they have pay so they can live in this city. I mean,
So that's always an interesting question. Somebody's chomping at the bit back there. Someone. I don't know who that is. So one of the things that makes that complicated but not impossible is there is a pretty bright line between the school district and the mayor's office. And so when we look at a city like Chicago where there's not that clean line, we see schools that are being taken over by a mayor who's not as friendly as we would need a mayor to be. Again, it doesn't make it impossible. In the past, there's been a rainy day fund for schools. Back in the days of layoffs, that's what rescued us from hundreds of layoffs. And so I think it's a good time to have those conversations. The related conversation is about affordable housing, and we have been able to get some initiatives and real housing through the mayor's office. It's slow going, but that's another approach. And of course, what some people will say is, isn't it better just to earn enough money to not have to worry about getting subsidized housing? I'm sure. But yeah, it's another angle, and we're using all of them.
Okay, thanks.
Last question.
So, do you know, Susan, if any of the candidates have endorsed, the mayoral candidates have endorsed it?
I believe just about all of them have. So Leno has endorsed.
We've heard who has naming names.
Okay, right. So the only ones that I know who haven't endorsed are candidates, the 5 or 6 who I don't know their names. The candidates who aren't as much on the front page of the paper. But everybody else has.
We'll look for them.
And as have the school board members and school board candidates. There are many school board candidates, and they've endorsed as well. Trustees have endorsed too. Yeah. No, it's really been, it kind of feels like the unifying initiative. Everybody wants to do this. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Lovely to see us all agree on something in San Francisco. So next up, we're going to invite Supervisor Jane Kim to come. She spoke about this briefly earlier today, but about Proposition C, which is another measure that deals with our commercial gross receipts tax.
Hi everyone again, good to see you. Thank you for staying here all day, and for those that are new, my name is Jane Kim and I serve on the San Francisco School, oh my gosh, did I say school board? I saw Allison Collins at Kingstree office. I'm bringing it back to 2006. Good to see you, Kim Tree. As one of the co-authors for Proposition C for childcare, as I mentioned, we intentionally got that letter somehow, and I have a handout. Proposition C does three things. It is a commercial gross receipts revenue measure that assesses a 3.5% increase on our commercial landlords on the profit that they make from commercial rent. We specifically excluded landlords that make $1 million or under in rent per year because we did not want to impact our small property owners. The reason why we focus on commercial gross receipts is because we have one of the lowest rates in the country. It is 0.3%. For commercial landlords. And to just put that into context, New York City is 4 to 6%. So this 3.5% increase will still have us below the rates of New York City, but raise $140 million, which we will primarily be dedicating to be San Francisco's single largest investment ever in early childhood education and childcare. So something I did not know until I started working on this measure with Supervisor Norman Yee is that San Francisco actually does a pretty good job with 4-year-olds. 92% of San Francisco 4-year-olds attend a quality preschool, but where we aren't doing well is with 0 to 3. So this measure would work to target families with children 0 to 3 so that they can access full day, 5 days a week, early childhood education and childcare. And the measure, as I mentioned this morning, will do 3 things. Number 1, we will wipe out the 2,500 low-income and homeless families off the wait list immediately that are waiting for a childcare slot today. There's a tremendous amount of studies that's been done on the impact of children who sit in their strollers all day with their mothers. We're seeing this increasingly become an issue, particularly with homeless children. It has an impact on brain development. 92% of a child's brain is largely developed by the time that they're 5 years old. So early childhood education is incredibly important. Oh, am I already at my time? Yes. Oh, okay. Sorry. Well, it's incredibly important.
Any questions from members?
Supervisor Campos.
Yes, thank you, Supervisor. I asked the same question of the housing measure, and obviously childcare is important. But one question that I have is, in terms of the party, why couldn't City Hall get on the same page?
Yeah, I would love to answer that question, Supervisor. I would love to answer that question.
Voters to choose between childcare and housing. Should we just say, you know what, go back to the drawing board and come back with some agreement about this?
So I announced this childcare initiative actually at City College with Bernie Sanders back in September. Supervisor Norman Yee and I have been working on it for over 6 months. And in November, we announced our commercial gross receipts measure at the full board. At the same time, Supervisor Aaron Peskin also introduced a commercial gross receipts measure for transportation. He just walked out of the room. And then we found out the San Francisco Labor Council was going to draft a commercial gross receipts measure for minimum compensation ordinance. Our 3-part, and by the way, Supervisor Yee and I reached out to all other 9 members of the Board of Supervisors to ask them for their support for this measure since November. During that time, we found out about these 2 other measures, so the 3 parties met all of December to negotiate what to do so that we didn't head down this collision course with the same revenue source but for 3 different uses. We came to a compromise. Supervisor Peskin graciously stepped out and said that he would work on a larger transportation measure for November, and also all of his stakeholders weren't on board with commercial gross receipts. And then Labor Council and our childhood stakeholders combined our measure. So our measure is dedicating 15%. Our measure was a smaller increase initially. It was not 3.5%. It was initially, I think, 2.5%. And we raised it so that we could dedicate 15% to the general fund to go towards minimum compensation ordinance, which will go towards raising the wages of our lowest paid city workers who currently make under minimum wage. And all it does, it gives them a 50 cents increase above minimum wage. It is paltry, but we want at minimum to raise new revenues to pay our lowest paid city workers so they wouldn't be making minimum wage working for San Francisco. That's another aspect of the bill. We were incredibly surprised when we found out on the last day you could file an initiative measure that one of my colleagues was introducing the same revenue source for a different cause that we all support. I have been the strongest proponent for affordable housing, and so we were a bit surprised. So by the time we all filed, it was too late to enter into any kind of negotiations. I'm incredibly sorry that voters have to make this choice. Our measure does not have a poison pill, by the way, so we would love it for both measures to pass, actually, but because their measure has a dual poison pill, only one measure is going to make it in June. Our measure does have a 50% plus one threshold because we decide to gather signatures via the voters. The other measure does have a 2/3 measure, which is a slightly higher threshold to pass. But we are working on another measure for November. Actually, Supervisor Hillary Ronan will be introducing it. She's been working with the Coalition on Homeless and other housing providers to introduce a $300 million gross receipts measure on companies that make $25 million and above, specifically to go towards homeless services, supportive housing, and affordable housing. So what we're asking voters is to support us in June, and let's support a bigger measure in November. The other measure is only going to raise about $67 million. This measure will do 3 times that, the Supervisor Ronan's measure.
One
Yes.
last question, and since you haven't asked a question before.
I work in a building where the revenue for the corporation will be under $1 million, but that entity is owned by a gentleman who owns another 7 buildings. So combined, it's going to be over $1 million.
Right. So he'll be covered under our ordinance.
So even though each separate building is a separate corporation and each of those buildings
That is an interesting question. I don't know the answer to that. My guess is that if they're each individual corporations, that corporation will be excluded from this revenue measure. But I will get back to you on that. But I'm pretty sure that if he pays taxes as 7 different entities, then that one building will be excluded from our revenue measure. We also, by the way, exclude PDR, nonprofit government buildings, because we didn't want to impact, and mixed residential commercial. So, residential buildings that have the bodega store, corner store at the bottom, we didn't want to impact those types of uses. Finally, I know I said it this morning, but the measure will also support subsidies for middle-class families and raise the wages of our child care workers.
Great. Thank you
We
very
would love to
much.
get your support.
Thank you very much. So we are now going to invite up a proponent for Proposition H. That would be you, Angelique.
As I walk right to my seat, you'll sit down.
No rest for the wicked. You get 2 minutes to present.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. I know you've been here a long time, so I'm going to keep this brief. I'm here as a proponent for Proposition H, better known as the TASER Initiative. I'm looking at my pad here because there have been a lot of developments with Proposition H. When I came today, I was going to sell you on the virtues of having tasers being of color. We've had a lot of issues with the police department and communities of color. We felt like tasers would be a better way to have safer communities. We were frustrated because we hadn't gotten progress through the police commission, and therefore we wanted to bring the issue to the people. The initiative would have initially, excuse me, this was based on suggestions from the 2016, the Obama administration in 2016 came at the behest of the Board of Supervisors, I think you were still on the board, to investigate the use of force policies for the police. And they came up with several suggestions. One of this was the use of CEDs, conductive energy devices known as tasers. And after much wrangling, we simply couldn't come to a policy. So the policy A was going to create a policy for tasers with the training attached to it. B, it was going to actually set some funding in the budget based on the Board of Supervisors funding without taking things away. And those are the things. This has changed because a policy actually has been implemented as of Thursday. and I think some people in this room had known about it. So we're hoping, we don't have the details of that policy yet, and if that policy works with the things with the police commission, then we'd be happy to support that measure as well. So I'm going to go ahead and defer. If I have any more time, I'm going to defer that and open that up for questions. Thank you.
Yeah, any members?
Of course, I knew you were going to.
I mean, look, I mean, you have the chief of police who
Yes.
supports the use of tasers,
Mhm.
who is basically saying, even if you support the use of tasers, this is the wrong way to do it. That you need to actually do it through a process that tries to get buy-in from the community. I personally I'm not convinced that tasers make sense. And certainly don't make sense without that process and training. And so why not have a process instead of actually going to the ballot requiring that it be done without any ability to actually tweak the policy unless you actually go back to the ballot?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think what has happened over the last 3 days kind of lends to your issue. Our frustration was that we had been working on this policy about tasers for the last 12 years. And I think as of November 2017, in theory, the police commission had decided on the use of tasers, but there was not a policy in place. And they were not going to even address the concept of having a policy in place until December of this year. Meanwhile, a very horrifying situation just happened in the neighborhood when a young man was gunned down in the community. And while for my occupation I utilize firearms, I believe in the training. We had training beyond training to make sure that we never draw our firearm unless it's absolutely positively necessary. With that being said, I believe in the robust training, but the problem is without that policy in place, that training wasn't even going to start. And that's why we took it to the ballot. We felt like we needed to have an opportunity to have that training start.
Quick follow-up, now that the policy's in place, will you drop the measure?
Again, this policy literally just went to print as of 2 days ago. We haven't even had a chance to review what the policy was. It's not open to the public yet, so we don't know. We don't know what that policy is yet. We are absolutely hopeful that it's something we can work with. We absolutely hope that there will be more follow-up information from the community to get that type of buy-in necessary for us to move forward.
So we get quick questions so we can get both of these.
Yes.
So I just have to correct something. We have been working with the police. The police union participated in the development of this policy since last November. They didn't like the policy. They didn't like the collaborative part of it, and so they came up with their own policy, which is less restrictive than what the police commission policy
Is there
was.
a
So
question?
they participated.
Sorry, is there a
So
question
so
there?
when you say that they didn't participate in the policy, what do you base that on?
I don't believe I said they didn't participate in the policy.
I thought that's what I heard.
No, that's not what I said.
It's
But, sure.
and last question over
So,
here.
sorry, I haven't really been involved in this, so sorry if this question's been asked a lot, but what about like Oscar Grant, and what about the many people who, so in theory the police officer claims that he was meaning to pull his taser, but accidentally pulled his firearm instead and shot Oscar Grant in the back. Then you have folks with heart problems, folks with their heart in a particular place in their chest who will die from that, and so, or people who are agitated. So is the idea just like the police are going to kill a fair amount of people, let's like do a harm reduction approach? Like, is that, like this will be better, like fewer of us are gonna die? Is that the thought behind this? Because I'm curious how adding an extra weapon will necessarily, his thought, it will reduce violence.
That is a great question, and I'm glad you brought it up. First of all, through the study of the Department of Justice, Obama's one we can trust actually, 65% of officer-involved encounters when used with tasers reduces 60% of reduction in harm, meaning less injuries, not fatalities, injuries, come from using conductive electronic devices rather than a firearm. Secondly, as it stands right now, the police department only has basically a de-escalation to when it becomes to a very serious combative situation where they feel like their life threatened, they go to a firearm. There is no in between. So in our mindset, we felt like the use of having a taser in place actually minimizes harm, not only to the police force, which, as she brought up, was very important, but basically to the community. Third of all, This has gone over almost 70% among people polled. Almost everybody, when I go out to Bayview, tell me they'd rather have a taser than a gun. Okay, and so no. And as a person of color that does not come across as quite as thin as somebody else, I can easily be mistaken for an African-American male. And if I get angry, my life is just as much in jeopardy as anybody else's. So let's make that clear. I don't want anybody killed. I don't want my brother who got gunned down in the Hill of Violence for 99 shots gunned down anymore. I don't want black men getting gunned down. I don't want anybody getting gunned down unless all options have failed. Okay? So let's be clear on that. I'm sorry, you brought up one other issue. So that was, I know, I would be disingenuous if I would say that our history with some of our brothers and sisters in the police department has not been all but roses. I'm hoping that the de-escalation policies that we put in place, we've got great advocates in the community. I feel like a lot of the resistance is because of our distrust with the police. My concern is let's get a policy in place first, and then I can turn that over to my brother, David Campos, who's always been a major advocate for justice and reform, to actually get some of these de-escalation policies in place. So that's where I come from, that's the place I come from. And I think if we threw out this measure and did not vote for this measure because we don't like the police, I think we are jeopardizing the lives of particularly brown and black people. So that's me. Any other questions?
We don't have time for any more questions. But thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, and then next we're going to bring up an opponent to the same measure.
Hi everyone, my name is Victoria and I'm here as an opponent to Proposition H. Proposition H is completely written by the Police Officer Association. So right now, as Petra brought up, there are a group of people working in City Hall on a taser policy. That consists of the ACLU, the Coalition on Homelessness, the Commission themselves, the police chief, and they are working on a policy that is going to take months and months because they need that. We know that cities that are armed with tasers have had the effect of deaths by the police, by tasers going up, once police officers are militarized even more with a taser. A taser is going to have deadly effects on pregnant people, older people, a lot of people represented by our homeless population. The taser is not something used in de-escalation when deadly force is necessary. So cops will still be using their guns for that. The taser will be added for everything from 0 up until that use of deadly force. The POA policy, which is what Proposition H does not even allow the police chief to bring in what he thinks should be used in the policy of tasers. It is completely up to the police. From being at that meeting at City Hall and being someone who is actively against tasers to begin with, the policy that's happening there, things like using a taser in a verbal altercation is still on the table. Things like being able to use a taser to break up a fight between two people, still on the table. And this is when you have the Bar Association and the ACLU around the table. So if the Police Officer Association is the only entity in deciding taser policy, we will see more deaths in our community. And that is the last thing we as people of color need and we as San Franciscans need. Please vote no on H.
All right. Any questions? Jesus?
So actually, the ACLU and stuff made changes Wednesday night, and we voted the policy in. There is now a policy that's very restrictive on when to use tasers. The police union has a policy they can use it at their discretion. Is that correct?
That is correct. And we know discretion means anything. From a cop having a bad day to a cop wanting to break up a verbal altercation. Discretion means everything for the SFPD. So let's follow that policy where stakeholders with knowledge and history of this deadly weapon have sat around the table.
Any other questions from members of the public? Actually, it's not a debate. So
I'm not debating, I'm asking a question.
Right, but since you're here as a proponent, I think we haven't allowed that for anybody else to allow a proponent and opponent to ask questions. So it really is for members of the public. Sorry, if we had started off the day doing that, then I would let you. But unfortunately, I think it's not fair for other situations. So, any other questions? Well, thank you very much, and thank you everybody for holding on. We have our final presentation of the day. Is the proponent for RM3, Regional Measure 3.
Am I really the last?
You are the last speaker of the day.
Well, my name's Patrick Collins, so it's St. Patrick's Day, so a little bit of luck of the Irish here. My ancestors came here 4 generations ago to our fair city, so it's a special day. But regardless of all of that, so let's talk about traffic. Traffic sucks. We don't like traffic. We've been talking about, actually probably the generations I just talked about. They all complain about traffic. But we have seen within the last year, 2 years, I think we're all in agreement that traffic has gotten significantly worse. Reports are saying since 2010, traffic has increased 80%, congestion has increased 4 times than it was. We're in a really bad place, and to say we're in a crisis is not an overstatement. So what are we going to do about it? Regional Measure 3 is a little unique. It's a 9-county Bay Area election. All counties are voting within to approve. It's a 50% plus 1. I'm focused mostly on San Francisco. We've got specific projects in each county. I can go through all of them. Regionally, BART, we're expanding. We're transitioning rail cars. We want to expand BART down to San Jose. Caltrain going into from the 3rd Street station going to the Transbay Terminal. We're sending $150 million to Muni to continue to add 300 plus new vehicles, for trains and for buses. Those are just the very quick specifics. There are many things to go through, but it is a county by county, almost local by local campaign, and we do have specific projects that are going on and oversight that we can go into if you have any questions. But I think, overall, like I said, we are in a crisis situation, and as Californians, as Bay Area residents, as San Franciscans, and as Democrats, we've always been able to come to the cause. So.
Any questions?
Yes.
Any questions from DCCC members to start with? If not, go ahead, Jed.
2 quickies. One, is it 50% plus 1 for each county, or is it 50% plus 1 for all voters added together? And the second one is it a fixed list of projects that is kind of delineated in the measure, or would it be to be decided by a board of some kind, and if so, who would that be?
So question 1, yes, it's 50% plus 1 through all 9 counties. So it's just going to be an aggregated total. Obviously, we're working county by county because going back to your second question is that so each county, there are delineated specific projects that have been written out. Regional Measure 3 was given birth last year through Senate Bill 595. So there are a number of folks maybe that were probably around or at least had a piece of that. But all of our 3 state representatives, Wiener, Chu, and Ting, were very instrumental in developing and passing this legislation. So there was through feedback, and so then it went through the MTC, the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, which then was pushed forward, signed by the governor, and then we pushed forward to do to put it on the ballot and let the voters decide. Yes, specific projects, it's written in the bill. So I do urge all of you to go to yesonrm3.com. I do have some information in the back that talks specifically within San Francisco. And some basic information there.
Any other questions?
You mentioned that, so if it passes and all the projects are delineated, under whose purview? Is there an overarching body that goes under the MTC or?
Right, so it is under the MTC, but there will be a creation of, so there are going to be really strict accountability measures and process through the whole thing. There's going to be a creation of a transportation inspector general. Just going through my notes here, sorry. And there will be independent financial audits. There will be a citizen oversight, an independent committee. Basically, we want to make this the most transparent process possible. And for each specific project, we want to make sure that there is public input in making sure that our elected officials and any other governing body is fully aware, and we're getting that money to where it was written in the bill and written in this campaign.
Thank you.
Yes.
All right, so, okay, so I'm not sure, I'm looking at this is kind of new to me, so correct me if I'm wrong. But if this is to buy new BART trains for expanded services, and that's like going to San Jose and down there. But San Jose and them aren't going to be paying for this. It's just the 3 metropolitan communities up here where BART
No,
started.
so let me sort of rehash. So how are we going to pay for this? Which is a major portion of all of it, is that there are 7 state-owned bridges within the 9 counties of the Bay Area. So the plan is that, so it's a $4.5 billion project towards transportation. 75% is going toward transportation bottlenecks, but 70%, part of it's BART, part of it's Muni. It's being, like I said, delineated specifically to certain counties. How are we going to pay for it? Yes. So within the 7 state-owned bridges, we have a plan to raise toll. So $3 over 6 years. So if passed, there will be a $1 increase on all state bridges Jan 1, 2019, and then 2 years after that it will go up another $1, and then another 2 years after that. So by 2025, the total will be $3, and that's going to cover the $4.5 billion plan. That said, this is focused on transportation. We need to get into the 21st century. We need to get people off of the road. We need to make sure that we have plenty of options. There are plans for expanded ferry service. There are plans for, again, making Caltrain available, having BART get down to San Jose, even down to Saratoga. We need more options.
Sorry, just to give everybody a chance. Last question, Angelica here. All right, so my question is this. Clearly, we're the employment epicenter next to San Jose. So my question then is, doesn't this disproportionately punish people who are coming out from the East Bay who can't afford to live here? I mean, I understand that the goal is to get them on public transit, and maybe the goal is to maybe price them out of crossing the bridge so they can't. So the only option they'll have is to be on public transit rather than use their cars. And that's pretty clever if it is. However, it just seems like it's very punitive about people who really can't afford that.
Can't afford to live here.
Can't afford to cross the bridge, can't afford to get on public transit, and basically, if we have another work stoppage in BART, basically they're stranded. So I'm just wondering how.
No, I mean, no, it's a legitimate point. Absolutely. I mean, so basically, carpoolers do get 50% off of all tolls. So that's one thing to think about. 2, MTC now is developing a plan for those that are in middle to low income families or households. There will be a 50% reduction on all tolls as well. The specifics on that, it's all being ironed out, but that is part of, in the language of this measure. So low income families, low income individuals will have a discount going over the bridge. So third thing, we need to, BART it's not working right now. So we need to get new trains. We need to get new rail cars. We need to have AC Transit have a better ability to get into town. The corridor, and that's part of the measure too, which I didn't mention, is that there will be a specific project towards having AC Transit come over the bridge and have a legitimate corridor. And obviously, what's going down in Soma and South Market, China Basin, it's a lot going on. But eventually, though, this is addressing the long-term plan and making sure that happens.
Okay, great. I think that is our last question. Thank you so much. And of course, you're welcome as we're cleaning up to talk to folks who continue to be here. Thank you, everybody, for coming out. Thank you to the members of the DCCC, the members of our Democratic clubs and parties. I'm supposed to thank somebody else, but I don't know who that is.
Amazing
No, of
executive
course.
director,
I was
Adam
doing that.
Van.
Without you, nothing would happen actually. And thank you to everybody who's tuned in on our live stream on Facebook. For any of you who missed any bit of it, the video will continue to be available on our Facebook page, so check it out. And our meeting where we're actually voting on our endorsements will be Wednesday, the 28th. So hope to see you there at the Tenderloin Community School. Thank you, everybody. Other thoughts, Jim?
Thank you, Jen. Thank you, Francis.